All right, everybody. I got another very special guest for you all this week. I want everybody to welcome to the show, Mr. Mike Burton. How are we doing today, Mike?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Always great to have a guest from over the pond, over in the UK. We don't get a whole lot of you on the show, so it's always a pleasure to get some people from a different perspective in comics. But as we usually start with our new time guests, let's start with your origin story. You know, what got you into comics? What got you onto this path where you started creating them?
Okay, so just, I mean, from being really, really tiny, I loved drawing. Like I was always drawing. Just sat in front of the TV. I had like this little tiny table and chair that I just used to sit and just draw all day until I got a Sega Genesis, and then I split my time 50-50. But what really got me into it was my dad, actually, because my dad's a massive comic book geek. Like he was part of the X-Men fan club back in the 70s and 80s, which was like a mail order fan club, and they had a magazine and everything. And he's still got them. In fact, I've inherited them, so I've got all of the like fan club magazines where they used to write in, so like growing up, I had like 12 to 14,000 comic books in the house. Like I had I could just every night I could be reading a different comic book. It was an endless supply of them. So, and that's how I learned to draw, just by copying them. I got so into them, yeah, that's sort of how I started. And also, strangely enough, like back in so when my dad was 18, I think he was 18. In the This must have been early 80s, I would think, or late 70s, early 80s. He actually did his own comic book with a friend. They called them fanzines back in the day, and they were just photocopied, stapled, and mostly just mail order. That's kind of what gave me the thought of, I could actually do my own comic book. Um, so yeah, so I remember doing, and my very first comic book ever was I was in junior school, so that would be like I was probably, oh god, how old do you maybe 10 or 11, and I drew this comic book and photocopied at school and sold it at school for 10 pence, to anybody that'd buy it, but it was awful. It was horrendous, but it was called Super Squad, and there was like a shape shifting character, and the best character in it was Sewage the Toxic Waste Man, which I was very proud of,
Nice.
not knowing what those words really meant. I kind of thought, like Toxic Avenger. I kind of, at that age, I just thought sewage meant something like toxic or something. So yeah, it was a guy that just fell into some sewage and then turned into a load of sewage. So yeah, so that's. I mean, there's probably a story there. I don't know.
There's probably places in like New York City where that could happen.
yeah, possibly, yeah. But yeah,
so the Hudson become a superhero.
Yeah, so that didn't really take off, that one, surprisingly. But then I just sort of, I'd always been doing art. I went to college and to do art and design. And then I became freelance, so I'd do like graphic design and illustration here and there. And then I ended up getting a job working as a graphic designer. And then when the lockdown sort of came in, I got made redundant, and then I went back to freelancing again, which is how I found Nick. So then we started working on London Gothic together.
Yeah, and Nick is the writer for London Gothic, correct?
Writer and creator, yeah. So it's all his ideas. I mean, we work together on little bits, but like it's mostly just straight out of his warped mind that it comes from. So,
so I'd love, before we get too far into London Gothic, I'd love to dig a little deeper into growing up in the UK with comics, because as someone from America, specifically New York in America, when we think of UK comics, we think of 2000 AD, we think of Judge Dredd, we think of the early and late 80s kind of British invasion of Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman and these writers.
Yeah.
But it seems like you had an upbringing that included kind of the American style superheroes. So was that prevalent around you, or were you kind of a unique case?
No, I think mostly that sort of is the case. I don't really think. I mean, maybe there are, but I don't really know about them. But I don't think in the UK we sort of differentiate that much between where the books come from. If they're American or the British, I don't think there's anybody that's sort of like just into the British comics. I mean, I'm sure there are a few out there, but mostly I think. I mean, it's we get them all imported, so it's like I think it was maybe a bit different back in the day because I know that like when my dad was collecting, it was kind of when he was younger, it was kind of difficult to get hold of the original American comics. They would send they sent some over because that's where you obviously get your pence copies, on the market. It tends to be a bit cheaper, don't they? Because with really expensive comics, people prefer the cent copies because they're sort of the original. But so we did get them, but there was, I think it was selected books. We used to get when my dad very first started with comic books was a comic book called Mighty World of Marvel, and it was a British reprint. And what they would do is they'd put in a few different stories. They might have like Avengers, an Iron Man story in there, maybe a Spider-Man story, and they'd collect them into sort of like an oversized version. And they were bigger than A4. They were quite a large, this big sort of compilation of them. And I think that's how a lot of people got exposed to them. And I think sort of like it must have been in the early 80s. They just started importing all the American ones. So I think most comic book collectors in the UK are really big into the American comics, and probably a lot more so than actually into the UK comics. I think the UK comics are sort of more of a niche sort of thing over here as opposed to the American comics. So, but I mean, that could be just coloured by my history of it and the people that I've known, I suppose. But yeah, for me, it was all the superhero comics really, and then as I got older, sort of, you say like I got into sort of Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely big for American comics in the UK.
And did you have so we have stories this happened with me and people much older than me as well, where you would get your books at the local grocery store or market, sometimes even the local gas station or something. There's even stories of head shops where there was comics in the back. You had to go through the section where all the let's call them water pipes are and everything to get them. Did you have direct market stores like we do today, or were you kind of having the same experience where there was a rack as you were getting your groceries?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we did. Yeah, so like in the supermarkets and stuff. But I mean, that's probably a little bit before my time, really. That was more sort of like my dad used to get them from the news agents and things like that. But I think sort of maybe it started in the 80s, but I think in the early 90s, that's when we started to have sort of dedicated comic book shops. But they were few and far between. There weren't many about. And what we used to have is, I don't know if you have anything equivalent in America. I'm not even sure if we still do them, to be honest. I probably do. But we used to have things called comic marts, which were just big. They'd rent out a huge room at a university or somewhere like that. And then all the sellers of comic books from around the country would all come and bring all of their wares, and it'd be all. It was just. I used to go with my dad, and I used to just love it because I mean, he used to give me like £5 or something like that, and I would have been like eight years old, and then for the whole day, all we'd be doing is just searching through comics, finding what we wanted, and you go away with massive stacks of comic books of all back issues and things like that. So it used to be like an event, when we used to go to one of these comic book marts. But now it's we've got Forbidden Planet, and there's quite a few comic book shops. Unfortunately, I think some of them have taken a hit from online purchasing and things now. So there's not as many about now. But yeah, it's mostly just dedicated comic book shops now. You don't really tend to get them in news agents or anywhere like that anymore. But
Yeah, so it does March sound. I mean, I know you have Comic Cons as well over there. I thought Bubble is one of the biggest ones in the world still, but that sounds to me like a small Comic Con almost.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, yeah. Nobody used to go dressed up or anything like that, but it was kind
Yeah.
of like that. But they used to find me really entertaining because I used to haggle. I used to haggle with them all. I used to be going around and like, there's a 50 pence for a comic book, and I'm like, would you do? I'm like really tiny kid, and I'm going, would you do me 40p on that? And they're all just smirking and going like, yeah, yeah, go on then. It was a bit of entertainment for them, I suppose. But yeah, they used to be really, really good.
Yeah, and it sounds like you had the UK's growth was the same as the United States because it was like late '80s, early '90s where the shops started to pick up, and even like around me, we didn't have a local shop per se. I think there was one in the city near me, but being someone who grew up in the country, getting my parents to go out to the city to go buy comics would have been a Herculean task. So we just went to the local grocery store and saw a rack of them. I was like, "Ooh, Captain America! There we go."
Yeah. Yeah, I think I never realized just how spoiled I was back then, because you just grow up around it, and it's just like, I just didn't realize how spoiled I was. So, I think, I was definitely spoiled growing up because of just, how much access I had to all those comic books, it was just, I could read something different every night. And, I had, I don't know if you got them in the States. I think you probably did, but, Marvel did these big tomes called Essentials, where they'd have it's all the back issues, like black and white printed ones, and my dad used to get them so I could read them and not touch his really expensive comics that get damaged with a little kid touching them. So, but yeah, I had access to all of that growing up. So yeah, I was definitely spoiled in that sense.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love those essentials. I got a bunch of those growing up because, yeah, they're black and white, which just takes some out of it, but they were like 20 or 30 issues, and it was like here in the States, it was like $20, which is nothing. Like, that's like three comics, 3 or 4 comics sometimes. And so growing up, I would get some of those because my parents would be like, "Oh, these are cheap," as opposed to getting him that thing he would read in an afternoon for $25 or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You mentioned earlier that your dad had created a comic too, which I mean, I love indie creators today, but there's something about people doing it back then that there's something more to it because like they didn't have the internet, they didn't have all these things that we have, so to put themselves out there like that is, I don't know, there's like another layer to it, I guess is the best way I could put it. Do you still have that book, or does he still have that book?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I still have it. In fact, I not only do I have because he did 2 issues, and he actually had the artwork done for a third one. He was the writer. He was the writer on it, and it was they had 2 separate stories. It was quite unique at the time actually, because there was the first story was about. Did you ever watch the film Star Kid?
No.
Okay, so it came out in like the late '90s, and we're sure that they read his comic book because it's literally the exact same story. And when he's naming himself, like, because he basically gets this like alien armor suit thing, and he's looking at himself and he's coming up with names for himself, and one of the names he comes up with is Star Kid. There's like a robot on the ship, and he says, "No, a name's been picked for you. It's Star Centaur." But this film came out called Star Kid, exactly the same story. Kid gets this, but anyway. But yeah, so it had that first story in, and then it had a team story that there were some mutants in it, and that was called Zero Squad. But the idea was the 2 stories would run separately, and the story of Star Center would be concluded in the 3rd issue, and then basically because he'd had this like alien suit on him, he'd get like some residual superpowers from it, like it affected his physiology, and then he'd become a character in the 2nd story, and it would become one full story then. So it's quite a unique idea for like for fanzine in the early 80s. But yeah, it was difficult for him. But yeah, but the third issue never actually came out. But I've got the artwork for that as well. But it's really cool to look at because it even did like interviews at a local comic book shop owner and stuff like that, and they did it by mail order. And he had like I think it's still got him. He had like a pile of like letters because people, when they'd send off for it and they'd send him the cash through the post, they'd send a letter along with it saying, like, "Oh, really loved issue 1. I like this," and so you get like almost like fan mail sort of thing. I think he's sold like maybe a couple of thousand copies, I think, of them. So it did all right, really.
That's honestly impressive. That's impressive today, let alone back then.
Yeah. So it did quite well. But I think because at the time it was we were having like an economic crisis in this country, and nobody could get a job. There were like 3 million unemployed people. My dad had just come out of school, and he just couldn't get a job. So he was on benefits, and he was getting like a couple like £15 a week or something like that to survive on. So when they were doing comic book, him and his friend just spent all their money on printing just to do this comic book. And then I think he ended up getting a job, and it's sort of they couldn't really do it anymore, like logistically. But it was, and of course I grew up, and then like with that in your mind, like, oh, my dad made a comic book. You're like, it's sort of almost a natural thing. Oh, I could do my own, and that's how I did the one at school. So it's only later on that I realised, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it's challenging to do.
So, excuse me, this is too personal a question, but is he still around today?
No, so I lost my dad during lockdown. So, unfortunately, he'd been going through quite a lot of things, and he ended up he took his own life during lockdown. So, but we didn't know how much he was struggling. Yeah,
I was going to say, if he was still, and maybe you could even do this. I mean, this is a super personal thing on your end, but I think it'd be really cool if you re-release these today.
Oh, that would be so cool. Just as like a look back into.
So like finally put out the third issue, and yeah,
it'd be cool. I mean, we actually spoke about for a long time. We were talking about me drawing. Us doing sort of like a sequel, and then using those stories as like totally updated. Because I mean, you read them now, and they're very much comic books of like back in the day. They're quite simple stories. Got some cool ideas, but he talked a long time about, and he started actually writing a script for doing like a sequel, like that's years later, and then using those comic books as like a history for the sequel sort of thing. But yeah, it would be really cool to do it, just as like even just to preserve them somehow online, so people could see sort of like what people were doing in the UK, because there were other fanzines like it, and a lot of cool ideas came out of them.
It would be honestly like a free idea for you here to do it like as a like do all three as a collection, like never before seen the third issue and all that, and then like down the line be like, and now I'm going to do the modern day reinvention of this in honor of my father. That story alone would be so cool to get, and I'm sure he would love it. Like, yeah,
I'm sure it would. Yeah, I mean, as well, like, because I mean, this is like my first real proper work. Like I've done bits and bobs, like of little things here and there, short stories, things like that. But this is my first real one, and he never got to see it. But I just know he'd have loved it. He'd have been, he'd have been so proud that I was actually doing a comic book. He would love that. So, but yeah, it would be cool to do that. I've got plans, possibly in the future, because he did. We spoke. I think he wrote the script for like sort of the first couple of issues, and then but we'd spoken in depth about the entire story arc. So I know the story, so I could probably do some sort of close approximation of what he would have actually done with it. So that would be cool to do, I think.
That would be an amazing story. And I'm sure he's so happy somewhere that you're following in that same dream. So you just showed it. We've kind of been around it a little bit, but the real reason you're here is to talk about this book that your first book that you're drawing, which is London Gothic. So let's start with the elevator pitch. Like, what is London Gothic?
Okay, so London Gothic is a horror action graphic novel. It's set in Victorian London, and the whole premise is that demons exist in the world, but there is an order called the Tutori, and these are like very highly trained fighters and warriors that have descended from the Knights Templar, and their job is to keep the demons at bay and keep people protected from from hell and all of these demons. And on the opposite side of them is the Sinestra, and they're all about power and utilizing the demons, and the central focus is that the Tutori are protecting these holy relics, which are the nails from the cross from when Jesus was crucified, and they've have residual power in them. So the Sinestra are hunting for them, and the Tutori are trying to stop them. So that's a basic summary of the setting and the world of London Gothic.
Yeah, and always cool themes that I'm always attracted to. I mean, anything that has a demon hunting, Christian mythology, that kind of stuff is always there's always some interest in there that I love. So I know you're not the writer, you're the artist, but when doing this, well, first, how much like collaboration did you have in the story with the writer and creator of the book?
Well, really, I think that it's sort of 90% Nick. The story is like he had this idea. He had the idea of all the characters, what he wanted from it, and so we collaborated. So we collaborated a little bit on little bits here and there, but for the most part, it's Nick's baby. Like I had to sort of fall into his sort of wavelength of how he perceived these characters and things like that. So we worked together on like designing the characters, and there was another guy called Sean. He'd done some initial sketches of a few of the characters and things like that. And we expanded upon that. But yeah, the story it's pretty much all Nick. I think we collaborated. I mean, he'd never written a comic book before, so I gave him some sort of tips on like formatting and things like that, and sort of maybe some of the order of some of the scenes. But for the most part, yeah, the story is it comes from Nick. I'm not sure my mind's warped enough to come up with quite that story, to be honest.
So then I guess the better way to go is, I mean, what attracted you to the story? Was it just that Nick seemed like somebody who was going to get this done, or did you really like fall in love with his idea?
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely, I fell in love with it. Like, I only had very brief because he found me on a website called Upwork, which is like you can find artists and designers and things for projects. And it was a very brief sort of pitch. He said that it was set in Victorian London, and like I love the Victorian period and like the clothing and things like that. So, but he said, oh, I'm looking for someone to do sort of a panel. And he didn't want to really give anything away about the story, so he said he wanted to do a panel of Jack the Ripper fighting a demon. So, and Jack the Ripper's not in the story or anything, but that was just like to get sort of a similar sort of idea behind it. And just from the brief sort of summary, I thought, yeah, Victorian London horror. This sounds awesome. Like I want this job. So instead of doing a panel, I did a whole page, made it into a little story. Where he's sort of fighting this demon, and then I think on the last panel I had him sort of stab the demon, and then it was a close up of the demon holding onto his face, and then in the next panel it was a woman saying thank you to him, and it's like I don't know, I just came up with this little story that maybe Jack Ripper was going around and really he's sort of he's these people are possessed or something, just a silly little
good
idea.
guy the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, I mean, it's not really. So, but it was just something, I don't know, just something with a bit of a hook to it to sort of interest him, and that sort of got me the job. And then we started talking about it more and more, and as it got more in depth, I mean, one of the things I love about it is that it draws from a lot of real myths and legends. Like all the places are real. and like some of the places in it. There's a scene on Poveglia Island in that's just it's in Venice, and it was like a plague island. So it's where they sent all the people that had the plague just to die. I think you're not allowed on the island. I'm not entirely sure why, but they did some like testing of the soil, and they found that the soil was 50% human ash at this place.
Wow.
And so it's like, but it's like it's things like that. So there's loads of research that have gone into all the places and the characters as well. So like a lot of them are like myths, real myths and legends from history, kind of retooled and reimagined for the story. But I think that's really cool because like when I was reading the script, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Eh? Search it up, and then you're like, oh, this is like a real folklore, and it's got stuff behind it. So I loved that, and I loved how the world's so in depth. There's so much to it. But yeah, that's what drew me to it, and I thought I've got to do this. So.
And did you guys originally decide to release it as a graphic novel? Because I know you have is it 96-page graphic novel out right now?
Yeah. Is it 96 or is it 92? I can't remember. I think it's 88 pages. Yeah, I think it's 88. Yeah, 88 pages of actual sequential art. But sorry, say again. What was your question? Sorry.
I was saying, was the original plan to release it just as a graphic novel, or did this get released in issues and you just recently collected it?
Yeah, we were always planning on doing it as a graphic novel. Originally, we were thinking of doing it just black and white, because it's obviously, I mean, for one person, it's a lot of work to do it in full color. But when we started developing the characters, and I started experimenting with like some texturing and lighting and things like that, it seemed like it would be selling it short, to do it in black and white. So we decided to go for full color. But it was always going to be a graphic novel, always going to be 4 parts. There's a potential for the story to carry on afterwards if people like it. But yeah, it tells one succinct story over 4 chapters. So it was all planned out ahead of time. Yeah.
So 4 chapters. This is the 9 whatever pages is. That's chapter 1, correct? So you guys are planning on doing 3 more after this?
That's right, yeah. But they won't necessarily all be the same length. I mean, to be honest, it's looking like chapter 2 will probably be a bit bigger, maybe another 10 pages. I think the last chapter will probably be maybe 120 pages, 130. So it's going to be, I mean, it's sort of like cutting off at the right point. So as soon as we don't have to abide by like a set amount of pages or anything like that. So we just want to cut it. I suppose it's like when you see like shows on Netflix. They don't have to stick to those rigid time frames. And that can help. I think with telling stories. So yeah, but yeah, they're all going to be quite hefty.
And when you originally published this, did you guys go through like a Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or something, or are you doing it completely out of pocket?
So we did do a Kickstarter. I think we only put on for sort of like £1,500. We ended up getting like about £2,000. But I mean, we're fresh, and we're new, so we're sort of building up our audience. So we expected not to get too much, but we just thought any amount we can get, it'll help with the printing costs. And for the most part, we want to get it out there to as many people as possible, and like for the actual prints, we've like gone for really high quality sort of stuff. Like we're not too bothered about the profit margin really. It's really just about getting it out there to as many people as possible, and hopefully people like it. We can keep going with it.
So you had their successful Kickstarter, and you're right. Like especially your first one, you're just trying to get your feet underneath you. The book's out now. I'm assuming you've started on volume 2 of this, or chapter 2?
Yeah. So I'm deep into chapter 2 now, probably about a quarter away through chapter 2, somewhere around there. We've also we've been talking about maybe bringing on another artist to do some origin stories, like to hold people over, because it is quite a lot of work with full color and everything. obviously there's a reasonable amount of time between issues, so we're thinking about maybe doing some sort of origin stories, bringing out some sort of one-shot sort of thing, because there's a lot of interesting characters in it, and it'd be nice to explore their backgrounds as well.
Sometimes thematically too, bringing in a second artist to do like the origin stories can work out, like give it a different feel.
Yeah.
I see it even in the mainstream stuff where they'll say like we have two artists on this book, and this artist does the flashback sequences, and it's like, as somebody who's been around long enough, I'm like, okay, an artist needed a break. Like nothing wrong with it, but yeah. So I mean, currently you guys got the book out. Have you been going have you guys been having any cons? I don't know what the world's like over in the UK right now. Are you having big events or anything like that?
Yeah, conventions are on. We've got one booked in November, so we're going to one in London in November, and we're looking at doing a few others here and there. There's actually one around my end that's coming up that I'm hoping to go to, but that's a very tiny one. But but I'll be at the London one along with Nick. So hopefully we'll be able to meet some people there and get more exposure to it. But yeah, we're trying to get into as many conventions as we can. But it's tough stuff getting in. There's a lot of people and not a lot of spaces really. I think there's a lot of people that have been working during lockdown on their comic books, haven't they? Because they've not had anything else to do. So now everybody's at conventions trying to get them out there. So.
It's all these fields. I can't tell you the amount of people that I've consulted with about podcasts. Because they're like, they got nothing to do. They, their jobs, everything's shut down over here. Their jobs laid them off or whatever. And now it's like, well, I'm sitting around the house. What if I try this thing I've been thinking about for years, and now I finally have the time to do it? Like, yeah, lockdowns were a blessing and a curse in many ways. Yeah. I think a lot of people explored the creativity through, which was nice.
Definitely.
So as I've said like 1,000 times, the book's currently out. Where are you? Do you guys have a website or anything you're selling it on? How are you getting it out to people?
So it's on London-Gothic.co.uk. You can purchase it there. You can get there's a printed copy on there. There's the signed printed copy as well, and there's also a digital version for download. We're also on is it called Get Comics? We're exploring the sort of like the more of a digital distribution comic. We're open to get on Comixology as well if possible, but at the minute it's best for us to go to the website. You can get a PDF on there, and you can view it online or download it. There's obviously we've got international delivery, but it's really expensive at the minute. So it's there's that option as well for people. That's where it's available from.
And if people want to follow you, and maybe even Nick was the writer's name, correct?
Nick Henry, that's right.
Yeah. If my listeners wanted to follow you further, where's the best place to send them?
Well, I suppose the London Gothic Twitter would probably be best. Instagram, we're both just we're London Gothic on those. I'm on Twitter, but I really need to start using it more because I very rarely put anything on. I think I'm just at Mike Burton or Mike David Burton. I don't even know what it is. I'm not very good with the social media. I need to get better with it, really. I mean, as an artist, it's probably going to be helpful, but but probably best just to follow London Gothic, really, because everything will be posted there. And even if we move on to something else after this, we'll still keep that active and let people know about new future projects, things like that.
Social media is one of those things, man, that I use because we have to, and it helps grow an audience and everything. But there's days where I go in there and I see everybody mad about something, and I'm just like, why are we wasting our time? There's so many nice things about life, guys. Let's talk about the good things.
Yeah.
But to everyone out there listening, remember, you can always look in the show notes down below. I'll have the link to the London Gothic website, so you can check that out. And make sure to follow Mike on social media as well as London Gothic on social media, so you can follow the book further, because the book does look. I haven't said this yet, but the book does look awesome. I got to check it out. Art's awesome. The coloring's great. Honestly, dude, your facial expressions throughout the book are my favorite part. It's something that's just so looked over in most comics. So I really was drawn to that when I read it. So everybody, yeah, go check the book out. It's awesome. And Mike, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us. And maybe when Volume 2 is ready to hit Kickstarter or something, we can get you and Nick on again sometime.
That would be awesome. Thank you very much for having me. It was a really good time.